Hello. Welcome to this video on OmniAuth and single sign-on, or SSO. My name is Blair, and I'm a GitLab support engineer. I'll be walking you through this topic on my GitLab Omnibus version 12.1.2-EE test instance that has a premium license. So first, GitLab leverages OmniAuth to support user authentication from a variety of providers. Since version 11.4, OmniAuth has been enabled by default in GitLab, so you don't have to manually turn it on or off in the GitLab RB file. OmniAuth, the general OmniAuth configuration can have a few very important settings. The allow single sign-on setting allows you to specify the providers that that you will allow to automatically create accounts for users. This defaults to false, and if it's false, then users have to be created manually and then manually attached to their OmniAuth provider before they can log in via OmniAuth. So that can be a troubleshooting point. If you also have LDAP enabled, which we'll talk about at the end of the video as well, you can auto-link your OmniAuth user with your LDAP user, but it does require the UID of the user to be the same in both LDAP and the OmniAuth provider, which we'll also talk about later on in the video. You can set block auto-created users to be true. This allows you to kind of vet users before they are allowed access. So if you are giving a provider access, maybe you want to make sure that users logging in and getting accounts automatically created are actually allowed or should have accounts. So that kind of allows you a bit of an audit step if needed. Additionally, if you do have an existing user on your site that you want to enable OmniAuth for, but they're not logging in via LDAP or SAML, you'll need to manually enable that for current users. But again, it's if this isn't with LDAP or SAML. So the first two OmniAuth providers we'll go over will probably need to do this. You can also configure OmniAuth providers to be external. And if you do that, then any user that logs in with that provider will be an external user and will have that access. Additionally, you can set sign-in restrictions in your admin section, which we can go over, and you can disable OmniAuth if needed, as well as keep user profiles up to date with certain OmniAuth providers. Again, that's a very shortened overview of OmniAuth. It'll sort of be what everything we do is kind of this high-level overview. There's a lot more to it, but this gets you kind of a starting place to set it up on your instance and test. So now we'll go through specific implementations for 4 different user authentication integrations. The first we'll go over is GitLab.com. The second will be Google. The third will be a SAML implementation. And the fourth will be an LDAP implementation. So the first implementation is GitLab.com. And really our documentation is great. And if you follow the steps for most of these implementations, you should be good to go. And that definitely holds true for GitLab.com. So what you'll first need to do is log in to your user on GitLab.com, and you can go to your user settings. And you'll need to create an application underneath your user settings. That application, the name, it doesn't matter. It's just something that will indicate to you what this application is for. Your redirect URIs will have your root domain for your GitLab instance, and then these 2 paths. And then your scope will be API. And so you can see this is the one I created. And this is my test domain with the 2 paths and the API. Once you create that application, it will give you an application ID and a secret. And so you'll save those and you'll move to your instance's GitLab.rb file, which I have mine pulled up here. And in the OmniAuth providers block, you want to add an entry for the GitLab provider. These provider names are very important. They directly map, so it can't be like GitLab 1, it just needs to be GitLab, exactly what they have in the documentation. Then you'll also put your app ID and app secret, which you got from setting up the application on GitLab.com. And then the args, you'll want to put the scope, which is API. As with anything in the GitLab RB, if you edit it, you'll need to run a reconfigure before those settings will be saved and will be able to be used. Once you run a reconfigure, what you'll see on your login screen, any OmniAuth provider will be in this little box down here. And then you'll just be able to click on the box, and then it should automatically sign you in. So actually first, I think I already have a user that would be for me for GitLab.com, and I already have an identity for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this user so that you can see how this service will automatically create a user. So now that I've deleted this user, I'll sign out as my admin user. And again, clicking the button for GitLab.com, it should essentially everything behind the scenes. So it communicated with GitLab.com, and I was already logged in to GitLab.com, and they just sent my credentials to this GitLab instance, and then there wasn't a current user, so it created a user with those credentials. And so that's really as easy as it gets with GitLab.com as a provider. The second provider we'll go over is Google. So to set it up, you'll have to log into your Google Cloud platform. You'll have to create a project. This is mine. I already created a GitLab project here. So I can go to that project, and I had it set up. Oh yeah, so I can go to that project, and let's see. I want to, yeah, so you go to the projects. Once you create the project, you can go, it'll display the dashboard of the project in Google, and then you can go to the API dashboard, and you'll want to go to credentials. And again, just like with the GitLab.com provider, really these are great steps, and following them won't lead you astray, or at least it didn't lead me astray. So they're pretty good steps. Once you get to the credentials, you'll need to fill out the OAuth consent screen. One thing it'll make you do is fill out the authorized domains and the support email. Once you have that filled out, you can create credentials. This is the one I created for my instance. Again, you'll need to set kind of base URL and then these 2 redirect URLs, and save it, and then it'll give you a client ID and client secret. So very similar to the GitLab.com setup. So once you do that in Google and you get your app ID and app secret, again, you go to your GitLab.rb file and you add another entry for the Google OAuth 2 provider. Again, the name is standardized. It's Google_OAuth 2. The app ID and app secret are from that credential that you created in your Google API dashboard. And then these args are standardized for Google OAuth, and they're in the documentation as well. One thing that I forgot to mention with the GitLab.com provider is that I put it up here in the allow single sign-on. I mentioned this before, but if you want users to be automatically created with the OmniAuth allow single sign-on, you'll need to put that provider in this list so that GitLab knows that it can automatically create a user from the information from the OAuth provider. I also have false for block auto-created users so that if we log in and it auto-creates user, that will immediately get access. But if you want to create an extra step, you can always set that to true. All right, so we've got this. Again, anytime you make a change to GitLab.rb, make sure you reconfigure. I've already set this up, so let's sign out. We had just signed in with GitLab.com. Once you reconfigure with the Google OAuth, you'll see this Google button. You can select the Google button, and it will connect to Google. You normally have maybe a couple accounts with Google, so click the account that you want to log in with. And actually, this is an interesting error. So if you saw in the previous page, I was trying to log in with my GitLab.com Google account. And what we had just done was create a user with GitLab.com user account with my email. And so essentially it tried to create a new account with that information, and it wasn't able to because there was already a user with that information. So it's good that it failed. We don't want two users with the same email. Remember, I went over this earlier, but if you have an existing user and you're trying to connect to OmniAuth, but you're not doing it with SAML or LDAP, you have to manually link the accounts. So I'll show you how to do that. So if we go back to the login page, and let's log in with GitLab.com because that worked before. And it's going a little slow. So it looks like it's authorizing on GitLab.com right now, going a little slow. You may want to reset it. Awesome. All right, so now we're logged in. If I go to my settings, you go to your user settings and then account, you'll see this social sign-in. You see that I'm connected with GitLab, and so I can connect with Google. And very similar, but now I'm connected. And I'll show you that, okay, if I sign out, and now I want to connect with Google, that I'll get logged in. And I'm still this user. So those are some, it's nice to point out maybe some pitfalls or some troubleshooting with the OAuth setup. And that gives you a good idea of how to do OmniAuth setup with GitLab.com as a provider as well as Google as a provider. Now we'll move on to more complex integrations, starting with SAML. SAML stands for Security Assertion and Markup Language. There can be lots of providers that can provide SAML assertions and SAML logins. So and they're normally called identity providers or IDPs. And so depending on your IDP, the setup on the IDP side can vary. But they all send a SAML, or GitLab will send them a SAML request, and they will send GitLab a SAML response with the information for the user that's trying to log in. And so we can always troubleshoot from that response and make sure that all the information is there. So for the starting building blocks of how to set up your SAML. Again, you'll want OmniAuth set up. You'll want SAML in the OmniAuth allow single sign-on list. If you want to auto-link the SAML user, remember with the other OmniAuth providers we just looked at, we couldn't auto-link a current user with that OmniAuth provider. With SAML, you can, as long as the email address coming for that SAML user in that SAML response matches the one, the GitLab user's email that you'd like to link. So for me, I have it set to true, and that means if you're logging in via SAML and the SAML response has an email that matches a current GitLab user, that SAML identity will be associated with that user, and it won't create a new user, and you won't have to manually link them, which is nice. And it won't give you the error that we just saw as well. From your OmniAuth provider, you'll get a cert fingerprint, you'll get, or a certificate, but most commonly a cert fingerprint. You'll have a target URL for your IDP, and then you'll have the name identifier format that you want the information in your SAML response to have. So for my testing, so if you're doing this for a test instance, this Docker image is really great to use as a test SAML IDP, and that's the name, test SAML IDP. It's got some great information on how to set it up and how to use it, how to run it, and that's what I have running right now. And so your consumer service URL is going to be your GitLab domain, and then we've got the path here. Again, that fingerprint is coming from your SAML IDP. The target URL, again, that is also from the SAML IDP, but the issuer is your GitLab instance, and the base normally the base URL of your GitLab instance. You can label it, this SAML provider, however you'd like, and essentially that label will just show on the sign-in page here. So let's say you don't call it SAML, your users know it by another name, you can edit this label and they'll know, okay, I log in with that name. SAML, again, has a lot of different ways to set it up, configurations. You can mark users as external, you can have required groups, you can have admin groups, you can do a variety of things. You can auto sign in with SAML, so bypassing the sign-in page altogether. Let's say your SAML response had different attribute statements, you can map those to the attributes that GitLab is looking for. The really important one is normally email. You can set a UID attribute, which will set the UID for SAML, for that SAML identity, which we'll go into after kind of describing the setup. And then we also have a troubleshooting page. Again, this is more of a high-level overview. We're not going to go into every single issue that can come up with SAML. The documentation is pretty thorough, so you can always start troubleshooting there. So this is a pretty basic SAML setup. Again, once you add things to your GitLab RB, make sure to run a reconfigure. Again, I have SAML in the allow single sign-on. I've got auto-link SAML user true, and I will log in via SAML. I have logged in as a user with the SAML IDP, so I think it should be pretty automatic, but we'll see. Awesome. So essentially what happened is GitLab sent a request to the SAML IDP, and the SAML IDP sent a response based on that request with this user's information, and then it signed in as this user. Some things that we can look at as an admin user that can help you troubleshoot. If you're in the admin and you go to users, and we just logged in as user 1, if you go to the identities tab, it will show you any of these OmniAuth providers or identities that this user is associated with. It'll give you the provider and then the identifier. It's called the extern UID or UID, but it identifies this user in this identity provider. We can look at some of the other ones we did. Sorry. It's been doing this. It will come back up in a second. Maybe. Okay. But what else can we talk about while that does its thing? We can, here we go. Awesome. So if we're in the admin area in the users and we go to this user, we go to identities, we can see we logged in with GitLab.com, we logged in with Google, and then again, identifiers. These can be very descriptive or very non-descriptive, just depending on the identity provider. So that's kind of the large overview of SAML. And so now we'll move to LDAP, which is probably the, I think, most robust user authentication integration we have currently. Though there have been a lot of issues and a lot of requests to kind of elevate the other user authentication integrations to the level of LDAP. LDAP stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. Again, lots of different providers. Active Directory is a very common one. But there's lots of different LDAP implementations out there. And we'll just speak, again, on a high level on a GitLab implementation, a generic GitLab implementation. For this, I test with this Docker image for OpenLDAP. So you can spin up this Docker image with OpenLDAP and seed the LDAP database fairly straightforward, and be able to use that, connect that with your GitLab instance. Again, how that's set up is going to be on your LDAP side, depending on your LDAP provider. So it can vary a lot on that side. In your GitLab.rb file, you'll want this GitLab Rails LDAP enabled to be true. And then you'll have this servers block, which we load with a YAML kind of template. And you can have the option of naming this whatever you want. The most common thing is main, which means it will be called an LDAP main by default. And again, this is YAML format, so you just have to make sure the spacing is correct. I have mine as main. Again, this label is just what's going to show on this user sign-in page. You'll have the host of your LDAP, so where can it be found? I just have mine at an IP, but if you have a domain, you'll want to specify the port, and the port number can vary depending on maybe how you have your SSL set up and different things like that. You want to set the LDAP attribute that contains the UID for that LDAP setup. You'll want the bind DN, so the user that LDAP will bind to as well as the password. You'll want to set the encryption. Again, you have a variety of options. You want to set the base where we can search for users. If you have a user filter, to further filter those users from the base that are allowed to log in via this LDAP. And you can also set a group base if you're running Enterprise Edition and you want to enable group sync. There are additional settings and a lot more depth to how you can set the settings, why you should set certain settings certain ways. So again, if you're setting this up and you're unsure, I really suggest going to this page, kind of walking through it, making sure that you've got everything set. Just like SAML, you can set the attributes. So we have default attributes set, but if in your LDAP setup you have something different set, then you can edit these. And again, you can set external groups as well as admin groups. So there's a lot of functionality there. Again, once you add your LDAP information to your GitLab.rb file, make sure to run a reconfigure. And then once you run a reconfigure, you can log in via LDAP. LDAP's a little bit different. It's one of the main tabs up here. So not in the OmniAuth box down here. And then you'll want to put in your LDAP username, which will be that UID attribute, and then a password. Once you sign in, GitLab will connect to LDAP, authenticate that user, and then then log you in as that user, or create a new user if you haven't been logged in, or link you to a current user if your email is the same or that user has the DN or external ID that's the same as that LDAP user. You can see here that I've successfully logged in as that LDAP user. So now I'll sign out, and I'll just point out a few more things as an admin user that can help you troubleshoot issues with OmniAuth, issues with LDAP, issues with user authentication integrations. Again, we can point out if you go to admin UI and users, I click on this user and I see the identities, and now we can see the identifier. For LDAP specifically, the identifier is always the DN, or the distinguished name of that user. And that's defined in the LDAP database. Again, if a user is logging in and they have the same, if a user is logging in via LDAP and they have the same DN as a current user, they'll get linked, or the same email as a current user, they'll get linked. And if they have both, then they'll also be linked. So again, the identities tab can be very helpful. Additionally, if you go to monitoring, if you have a premium license, you can go to the audit log. Oh, I did this again. No. So yeah, you can go to the audit log to see how users log in and what they logged in as. You can also go to the production log to see kind of how things logged in. You can also see the SAML response in the production log, which we'll point out after this resolves. We will also set up an enterprise feature. We'll set up a group sync just so you kind of get an idea of what that looks like on a global scale. Let's see. Well, but yeah, so when you have LDAP again is more robust. It's going to have a daily user sync and an hourly group sync enabled. And that will allow you, if you have any group syncs defined, which we'll show in a second, those will be synced. So if you add new users to the groups in LDAP, those will be automatically synced on the hour. And then for user syncs, you will make sure that the user still present in LDAP, any GitLab users with LDAP identities still found in LDAP, and that they're not blocked. And then also they will update the email address. They'll actually now update the user's name, like their display name, as well in the sync. And this is only for current users that are already existing in GitLab. New users will be automatically created on login. So again, if we go to the admin area, If we go to monitoring and the audit log, I believe this is a premium feature, but if you go to user events, you can see that users are logged in and what type of authentication they logged in at. If you go to the production log, you can a lot of times see different types of LDAP logins. These are errors, but how they logged in. You can also see the SAML response. So the base 64 encoded SAML response is always in the production log. And that's really helpful because you can decode that and see what they're sending, which is a great first step when troubleshooting SAML issues. But yeah, that's kind of an overview of troubleshooting in the admin area. And then kind of one last thing, we'll go over how to set up a group sync. So if you have a license that allows you to utilize LDAP group sync and you have LDAP enabled, in your settings for that group, you'll see LDAP synchronization. And this is how you can set up LDAP synchronizations. My current LDAP setup doesn't have group CNs, but if you did have group CNs, you could set this and then choose it from your LDAP provider. But if you have a premium license, you can set a user filter. And again, these users have to be within the LDAP group base defined. But you could say, okay, I want Dylan in this group. So anyone with the UID Dylan can be in the group, and then you can set the access. And from the members page, you can, if you want to automatically see them, you can see sync now. But again, the syncs occur every hour. They will only sync users that have logged in that are current GitLab users. So if there is like an LDAP user in the group that hasn't been created on GitLab yet, then that user will have to log in. But upon login, and once they log in, then they'll be able to be synced with the groups. Again, there's a lot more nuance, there's a lot more specifics, but that kind of gives you a good overview of how to set up some basic OmniAuth integrations, be able to play around with it. And once you get that kind of knowledge underneath your belt, you can move on to the more advanced topics within user authentication and troubleshooting issues with it. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you learned something, and yeah, happy testing with SAML and OmniAuth in the LDAP. Thanks, bye.